When you take a look at value, we by extension take a look at wealth, right? Because I often think of wealth as a derivative of value, meaning that if you're wealthy when you have an abundance of what you value, really the conversation is about what do you value and why.
In this episode of Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness, Jonathan Satovsky is joined by Jennifer Wines, author of Invisible Wealth, founder of Invisible Wealth Consulting, and a former private wealth advisor at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Fidelity. Jennifer shares her journey from advising high net worth clients to redefining what true wealth means.
Welcome to Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness, the podcast where we explore what it truly means to live a rich life, not just in terms of financial assets, but in purpose, clarity, and legacy. I'm your host, Jonathan Satovsky, the illegal Satovsky vodka. And today we're joined by someone who's helped redefine the very meaning of wealth in today's world. Jennifer Wines, not vodka, is a former private wealth advisor, author of Invisible Wealth, and the founder of Invisible Wealth Consulting, a firm devoted to guiding the next generation through the rich complexities of modern wealth. Her message is clear. New wealth paradigm extends far beyond money. This is a belief we both share, as witnessed by my Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness podcast that we're trying to bring to light. So if you're someone who's built material success, today we're going to help you get into how you can have a richer and a more soul-aligned life for your next chapter. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for spending the time. I know we just passed the church bells. Where are you in the world at this moment in time? I think I heard church bells out your window.
You heard church bells, and these church bells are from a church that are in Mallorca, in Spain, a little island next to Ibiza, if anyone's been there, perhaps. And yeah, I just arrived here yesterday after some time in Barcelona, Costa Brava, and Madrid. So it's a real pleasure to be here and to be chatting with you. Although the last time I saw you, we were in New York, and I had the pleasure of coming by your very special office, and we had such a great chat that just blew my mind. So I'm happy that we get to reconnect and continue that conversation here today.
So I thought the book you wrote and the stories that you of your own journey and the travel adventures, maybe you could start from the beginning of what inspired you to start navigating and charting your own path and charting your own course, where that you're not only living an inspired life, but inspiring others to live the life that's truly fulfilling and abundant.
Sure thing. So, gosh, how much time do you have? No, I'm just kidding. I'll say, listen, on the personal side of the coin, right? I've lived a very interesting life in the sense that I've lived on different parts of the wealth spectrum in the traditional sense, right? There have been times growing up where we didn't have a lot of money, but there's also been times where I've been exposed to incredible financial wealth, let's say. And
You started, let's start from the very beginning. I think you're originally from Mexico City, if I'm not mistaken, yeah?
Yeah, not far from there. Closer to Monterrey, but yeah, Mexico. Originally from Mexico.
Okay.
So yeah, life started there. And, long story short, moved 10 times by the age of 20, all within North America. So started in Mexico, formative years in Canada, 6 states in the US, southern states, northern states, and everywhere in between. So really kind of graced the East Coast, let's say, from Texas up to New Hampshire. And so it was quite a dynamic upbringing, we'll say that. And of course, a lot of lessons along the way. We all have so many lessons and unique insights that we carry within self, which make up our own kind of complex matrix of being. But yes, everything started in Mexico. You're exactly right.
And then you came into the wealth management field in Boston, if I'm not mistaken. So in the Northeast, you were in wealth management, and you started advising families. Did you do it because you had a passion for it? Did you do it because you were, what was the experience starting? Because obviously we want to get to where Invisible Wealth, but the starting chapters of, okay, I'm getting into wealth management to try to contribute to people's lives, and then, wait a second, is this what I expected? What was the experience like as you started on that journey?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. So I was in law school in Boston, and I was studying for the bar, and I didn't take Barbary, which is basically the prep course that a lot of people take for the exam prep. And so I'm self-studying, and I take the bar, and they make you wait 3 months, like before you get these results, because half of it's multiple choice, half of it's written. 3 months, I'm waiting, applying to legal jobs, non-legal jobs. This is 2010, literally arguably the worst year on record to graduate from law school, like academic papers written about it. So like that was great timing on my behalf. Graduated, so I'm applying to legal jobs, non-legal jobs, waiting for my bar results. And I got the opportunity to join Goldman Sachs in their private wealth management group. And the week I started at Goldman was the week that I received my bar results that I passed. Although, of course, at that point in time, I was already in the seat at Goldman in wealth management. And to be honest with you, I mean, I could sit here and come up with this grand story about this is how I always thought that this trajectory would go. But the truth is, like, I had no idea. I mean, I literally applied to a job and it ended up being at Goldman, and I went through like 14 million interviews, got the job, started, and there we were. And so that launched me onto my wealth management career, let's say. And yeah, so that's where things started. It was post-law school at Goldman in their wealth management group.
So tell us a little bit about that experience in terms of Goldman, and you're immediately thrown into dealing with some of the most affluent families in the world, right? Mm-hmm. You're really in the mix of it. So what did you learn in those first years about advising ultra high net worth families?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was a really, really great place to learn the business because, I mean, there's such a well-oiled machine. And I mean, I really learned how to dot my I's and cross my T's there, and had incredible visibility into grand wealth within the Boston ecosystem, predominantly the New England area. And I learned a lot, you know, but it was the beginning, and it took some time to kind of synthesize what was really going on, but it was like a really fantastic way to start my career. And then, of course, from there, as most of us have done, you know, you kind of shift perhaps companies. And so I transitioned over to JP Morgan Private Bank, and then most recently Fidelity Private Wealth Management. And along the way, because, you know, each business has their own kind of approach and forte, I've learned different ways to kind of interface with clients. And of course, over time as well, conversations start to shift and change and evolve. So it was a blessing in retrospect to really be at 3 incredible firms that were doing really good work within the wealth management space, and to learn within those experiences.
So now let's take you, okay, that's awesome. Great foundation. So you have like all the resume credential stuff. Everyone wants you. You can go anywhere. And then something sparked inside where you're inspired to make a transition from advising ultra high net worth individuals to founding this Invisible Wealth Consulting. What was the impetus that sort of gave you the courage to venture out on your own and try something, charting your own course?
Well, it was invisible, and it was my intuition. So we'll start with that. And so the kind of fun part of the story, just to kind of give some texture right behind the scenes. I mean, I was in New York, which maybe, are you in New York right now? Or I know you have, okay.
Yeah.
So I was in New York, probably just a few blocks away from where you're at the moment. And then this thing, you know, COVID hits. And so I pack up my little New York apartment because my lease had expired anyways. And I packed my life into 2 suitcases. The rest went into storage, go down to Miami, as many New Yorkers did. And thought I would be there for 3 months, turned into 2.5 years. And so I was down in Miami for 2.5 years. And during that time, I thought to myself, so much in the world is changing, right? So much is changing. And of course, we see that reflected in headlines and in news stories and news bites, but also I saw that reality reflected back to me by virtue of the conversations I was having with clients. And I'm sure, and I want to hear your experience too, because I'm sure the same thing happened for you, right? The conversations were shifting. People started to really open up and reconceptualize what they were valuing and why. And when you take a look at value, we by extension take a look at wealth, right? Because I often think of wealth as a derivative of value, meaning that if you're wealthy when you have an abundance of what you value, really the conversation is about what do you value and why. So I saw this happening through virtue of the conversations I was having with clients, but also quite candidly, the conversations I was having with self, right? Like, what do I value and why? And why am I structuring my life in a certain way? Is that really my own kind of personal narrative, or is that a narrative that I'm used to hearing and therefore adopt, right? So I, based upon intuition alone, I had no idea really, candidly, of what I was going to do, but I just knew that it was time for me to take a risk. And so I did exactly that. And yeah, so basically my boss, who's incredible, his name is Eddie, and Eddie, I'll send this to you so you can listen to it afterwards, but he's magnificent, one of the best managers I've ever had. And I just said to him, I love Fidelity. I love my team. I love my clients. But if I'm ever going to take a risk, it's now. And I could just feel this wind at my back, something telling me to take this risk. So I just listened to that.
Brilliant. So as you start following your intuition, you start penning this book to try to articulate and get out what does invisible wealth mean, and talking about it as a new paradigm. So how do you define what it means, and how is it different than traditional wealth? How would you describe it to someone that you meet today?
Well, I'm curious, and I often love to ask this question. I mean, Jonathan, you're someone who thinks so deeply about wealth in so many dimensions, right? I'm curious to think, or ask rather, what's your interpretation of what invisible wealth is? Maybe you know a little bit more now, but maybe at first blush, or what it is now, or how do you kind of think about invisible wealth for you?
This is a first. I've been asked a question on my own podcast, but I like this. This is good. I've done a lot of reading, as we talked about, and my definition of invisible wealth, for me, and everyone has their own lens and interpretation, is inner peace. Since we're getting a little spiritual here, I just heard this concept today of the difference between a black hole and the sun. A black hole takes energy from everything and everyone around it, and the sun shines energy and helps brighten everybody else around them. So for me, I use it as an internal framework to be like the sun, to try to be calm on the inside and help brighten up those around me, try to help enrich other people's lives. And then the last little concept, which is medical, is if you do something hedonically pleasurable for yourself, I've been told that it changes the RNA in your bloodstream for a day. If you do something eudonically pleasurable for others, it changes your bloodstream for a week. So my definition of wealth is the ability to impact your own, be at peace with what you're doing, and the ability to impact and influence the people that you come across in your life. So that's my own definition.
Gorgeous.
I don't know if it fits your definition of inner wealth, invisible wealth.
No, that's wonderful. I absolutely love that. And, it's similar to what we talked about when I came and visited you in your office. It's very much aligned. What you shared there is what you're sharing here, save for the black hole and sun concept. But no, it's fascinating. And I think, too, you do that, right? And I feel that you really live and embody that, and you want to radiate and activate others.
I'm trying. That's why I wanted to bring you on, because I thought that there was a lot of depth to what it is that you're trying to do and to educate people, because I imagine going back to the first couple of years of Goldman and JP Morgan and Fidelity, the first call that someone might have with you is, I want to make more money, I want to do this, I want to do that. And it's all like money, what's not enough, or a lot of anxiety around money. Scarcity or abundance or greed or fear. It's like all these emotions. And so getting outside of that ecosystem, I just wonder how that's changed your perspective on invisible wealth, of particularly as you travel the world, you see people with not the same material aspirations, but seem happy and joyous, that radiate from the inside out.
Yes, beautiful. And so thank you for sharing. That's wonderful. And again, I think we're very much aligned.
I'm guessing. I'm just assuming. I don't mean to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to, foster the imagination of what you might be experiencing on your journey.
No, it's wonderful and spot on. And so for me, when I was sitting down and thinking about invisible wealth, which were two words that just kind of paired together, and they paired together in my mind and forever were together. And that became the title of the book. And then I also think of them as the concept for redefining wealth. And then pair that with the 5 principles of invisible wealth, which is the complementary framework for redefining wealth, right? So I'll just take a quick step back, because this actually folds in beautifully with the title of this podcast being Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness. Because if we take a look back and think about what is invisible wealth, we can first consider what is wealth? And if we think about what is wealth, when we take a look back, the word came into our lexicon in the mid-13th century from England, from the root word well, W-E-L-E or W-E-A-L, depending on the source. And it really meant well-being. So wealth found its definitional roots in well-being and really embodied this essence of health and happiness. But here's the thing, over time, wealth started to become synonymous with an abundance of money and material possessions. Now, there are very real reasons for this due to the increased sophistication of money and the increased sophistication of economies over time, right? So as our money got more sophisticated, as our economies became more sophisticated, things started to change. And so did our concept and definition of wealth. And that's the thing, the meaning of words, they can evolve and change over time. And in fact, there's a word for this, it's called etymology, right? And the changing of a word really depends upon what's going on within its environment, right? It really depends upon the technological advancements and societal shifts that are underway. And because we're undergoing such a profound shift, right, at exponential rates, it's really providing us with an incredibly unique opportunity to revisit and redefine wealth. Like, what does this definition actually mean to us? So if we look at the word wealth today, right, and with a look to the future, we can think about wealth in a different way, right? And the invitation that Invisible Wealth puts forth is that we're wealthy when we have an abundance of what we value, right? So if people can value money, of course, and that's how they define their concept of wealth, zero judgment. But there's also the optionality and the multidimensionality to value other things, right? If you're really considering the universe of things or assets that we can value, and those things are codified or captured in the 5 principles of invisible wealth.
Tell us more. Okay, perfect. That's amazing. So carry us forward to highlight and educate people of, I always like the idea of balance, which is kind of why the wisdom, wealth, and wellness. But I remember early in life that many people that were immensely successful in one area of their life, because they were so focused on their tunnel vision, ended up ignoring other parts of their life and ended up having challenges. So my desire is always to try to provide balance, like a yin and yang. So it would be really great to educate our audience. What are the 5 stages of wealth? What are the 5 elements as you define them?
Sure, I'm just jotting something down because you say focus, and I want to come back to that. So 5 principles. Okay, let's list them to think about, to frame the conversation. So the first one is money and investment, as you might imagine. The second is health and quality of life. The third is knowledge, status, influence. The fourth is time, energy, and experiences. And the 5th, last but not least, is relationship with self and others. All right, so these are all groups of assets that we go through life wanting to attain more of, albeit perhaps at different points and times in our lives, right? And if we take a look at each of these assets, groups of assets rather, we'll notice and we'll agree that objectively and collectively, they're all inherently valuable to the human experience, right? Because every human values money and health and knowledge and time and relationships. But the way that we allocate or we manage these assets is going to be different for each person, because we each have our own complex matrix of being, which for me, for example, is rooted in my experience of born in Mexico, years in Canada, US, and all the experiences that were sprinkled in between that. And Jonathan, I know you have, and you shared with me some of your incredible experiences as well. And what motivated you to create your firm, right? What the inspiration or the catalyst was for you to lean into certain assets at different points and times in your life. And so we each have this kind of beautiful mosaic of optionality to lean into. And oftentimes it's around these 5 principles or these 5 sets of assets.
In question.
Sure.
In your, I don't know if this has changed, but in your early years working with these ultra high net worth families at Goldman, JP Morgan, Fidelity, which step did you find most people were struggling with and why?
Yeah, well, so I will say this. They could be steps for some people in the sense that they want to achieve money. I'm trying to do it in like a visual way. Money and investment, health, knowledge.
But what I mean is they thought they came to you to talk about money,
yes.
But they stayed with you because you helped them with those other areas, presumably. I think that's, it's interesting because like often they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm just trying to help, there's no definition. I'm just trying to be of value in your life, period.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious from your perspective, which area, we won't call it step, which area do you think people were more, had a greater proclivity to be blind to?
Mm-hmm.
And that you kind of lent in to be able to feel like you could make a greater impact? Let's frame it like that.
It's a really, really great question, a very dynamic question. And I think what's interesting is that oftentimes people might come to the conversation and they really, in the back of their mind, they're thinking about their health, they're thinking about their kids, they're thinking about their status, I mean, that's a real thing. And they're wanting to leverage money as a conduit, as a means to achieving that end. So when I often think about wealth goals, and this is what I talk about in terms of invisible wealth consulting, I think about it in terms of shifting from quantitative wealth management to qualitative wealth management. Now, what you do, Jonathan, and what everyone does within this industry anyways, is, if we're all doing it right, is really talking about the wealth goals as it relates to other assets and really using money as a tool to help facilitate the achievement of that goal. But a wealth goal can be, how do I spend more time with my daughter before she leaves for college, right? How do I optimize my health because I'm really feeling lousy and I have zero vitality and I need more Jonathans in my world to light me up, and what do I eat, So how do I manage my stress, right? And how do I optimize these other assets in my life? And oftentimes these other assets get relegated to the side because we're always trying to optimize, attain, maintain, and optimize money, right? Because that was the limited scope of the conversation and the definition. So we were really constrained by the one-dimensional definition of wealth in that it was only about money.
Did you find then or more now that people lean into engaging in these deeper conversations to have, like you said about this shift post-COVID, that they're more open to digging deeper?
100%. So I think that people are very much open to digging deeper. They're willing to go into the corners that no one was showing a flashlight in before, and so we're kind of illuminating different parts of aspects of life, or assets of life, as I often say. They're assets and aspects of life that we can kind of explore in a more meaningful and profound way. And that was part of the catalyst, again, for being in Miami and having these conversations during COVID and just saying, there's something going on here. There's something much bigger than, this kind of intimate conversation that might feel like a one-off. This is indicative of something much larger in the sense that we're all revisiting what we value, and by extension, revisiting our concept and definition of wealth.
So on paper, on the definition of JP Morgan or Goldman or Fidelity's definition, on paper, they'd be considered successful, but there was something that was unfulfilled inside. And I'm curious, what do you think caused the disconnect? And I think you alluded to it earlier, so I don't mean to front run and answer the question for you, but I'm going to surmise perhaps the idea of doing what other people's, managing to other people's expectations versus from the inside out. Is that, am I getting in the right direction?
Yep. And you're also pulling in kind of this concept and ethos of invisibility, right? Because ultimately it all kind of happens from within. And alignment, true alignment and satisfaction and success, if you will, really is dictated by the inside, one's own kind of concept of their own North Star. And I think oftentimes when we adopt and embrace narratives that are not our own, we inherently create a dislocation within self. And you walk around with this dislocation, kind of like a rock in your shoe, and you're like, why is this so uncomfortable? This journey should be magnificent. It's like, well, yeah, because you have a rock in your shoe, or you're not aligned, you're not embracing your own authentic essence. And so I think that, as kind of cliche as these conversations once were, we're embracing and recognizing that, in fact, this is the only conversation that we should really be having.
So, I don't know I'm a stats guy, so I don't know statistically the number of people that are actually tuned into this. Maybe it's increasing as you're alluding to, but how can someone who's curious but hasn't maybe had the courage to start the journey to begin to build some spiritual wealth, if they spent their life focused on only financial success or external success, how does someone make that transition to start, taking steps in that direction on that path? What is your best coaching and guidance to get them going?
I think, so you mentioned spiritual, and I want to double tap, highlight, underline this word, because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about by virtue of conversations that I've had within families, but also just within myself. Someone asked me the other day, what do you think about spiritual capital? And I started to think to myself, some of the most spiritual people that I know don't consider themselves spiritual, if that makes sense. So I don't want to harp too much on this, but I do think that the concept of invisible wealth isn't necessarily about spirituality. Although if one wants to define wealth as spirituality, then fantastic. So with that, for me, I'm a big believer in your values determine what you value. So if someone wants to start to figure out how they define their own concept of wealth, really the conversation starts with understanding what your values are, right? So someone needs to, or I'd encourage someone to determine what their top 5 core values are. And I have on my website and Instagram and whatever, or we can link here, a list of 100 values so people can just take a quick look. But find the top 5 that like resonate with your core. It's not a thinking thing, it's an intuitive thing. Your gut reaction. Circle the 5. All right. So those are your 5 values. Now, if your values determine what you value, it's great to know that, because what you value is often deemed important, right? And what's important is often deemed a priority. And what's a priority is often pegged to or tied to a goal. So, and if you're living in alignment, your values and your goals will be aligned, because to live in alignment quite literally means to arrange yourself in a straight line as possible towards that goal. So you need to fundamentally understand what your values are to therefore identify what your goals are, your true goals, therefore to achieve your true definition of wealth. Now, if your true values are such that you are finding money important, you're prioritizing money, and that's your wealth goal, well then so it be it. That means you're living in alignment, and there's no judgment here, right? But if you find that your values are leading you to a different path, that perhaps you're leading you to a different goal, then recognize that that's wonderful and powerful, because if you're able to align yourself, again, arrange yourself within life accordingly, then you will be more inclined to live a wealthy, rich life.
It's interesting. It makes me think, I remember hearing an interview with Bruce Springsteen, and he was talking about the song Tunnel of Love, and he was asking for the inspiration of it. And he was talking about the idea that basically, me and my high school buddies got together, we created this band, and we went through this tunnel of love like we were just charging forward to be rock stars, And then, now we're 50 plus, and we turn around and we still got the same buddies that are hanging out with us, but they, have a couple LBs, they may have lost their hair, they just don't, they've aged. And so they're like, wait a second, we thought we were pursuing this journey on this one mountain or this one path, and we got there, and it's like, well, the only thing that matters is I'm still hanging with my buddies, So it was kind of an interesting, the way he told it was more eloquent than what I just said, but you often speak about legacy in a broader sense, not just financial. What does a soul-aligned legacy look like? Can you pick that up, whether someone's, aligned, or, whether you can actually help them make a shift to get them aligned into a place where they're just like flowing?
I think being soul aligned, right, starts with understanding what your values are and honoring what those are. And again, those are going to change. They can change over time, because values are subjective and they're changeable over time. They're malleable. So when your soul is aligned, you're really honoring what your values are, and you're arranging your life accordingly. And so perhaps tunnel of love, here we go, set them on their trajectory of partying and all of this. And there wasn't really that investment check-in. I mean, better than anyone, you sit down with your clients and you do investment check-ins, and you think about how are you allocated? What is your portfolio? What is your strategy with your money? But what about your strategy for all the other assets? Are they doing what you want them to do? So it's really just expanding the conversation. And from a legacy standpoint, if you're managing your assets in a way that's fundamentally resonant with who you are, fantastic. And if you have the clarity right, of what you want to kind of pass on, let's say, if you have that clarity within self, that's going to make it easier to communicate with your children or your family or your loved ones. And that clarity is going to create cohesion, right? And cohesion creates harmony. So really it starts with, on an individual basis, I firmly believe that internal clarity then supports the cohesion with others, which then ultimately supports cohesion within the system.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, we're running out of time, so I got to squeeze in a couple more because I can go on for hours because there's so much good stuff to talk about here. But let's try. What kind of practices do you have to personally stay grounded in your own definition or version of invisible wealth?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you mentioned you're traveling, you're in Majorca, but give us some tips and daily practices or mindsets that guide you that might be able to help the audience that they can adopt that might help them live as joyfully as you've been fortunate to share with us.
With pleasure. One thing that I did, and I actually did it today, it's funny you bring this up. So again, as mentioned before, I'm a big proponent and advocate of identifying what your values are, all right? So select 5, select the ones that resonate, check in, test and play, test and play, test and learn. But once you kind of figure out, like at this point in time in my life, Jonathan might say, freedom is one of my priorities, and name the rest. And so what I did with mine is I created a kind of like, so mine are freedom, adventure, creativity, tenacity, and optimism. And those, if you line them up, are facto. So it's just something like a turn of phrase that I can remember really easy, means nothing, but facto. Okay, fine.
Awesome.
So when I'm making a decision, I'm kind of like, okay, how do I see this decision or this situation through the lens of my values, right? Like if I have my facto glasses on, how am I going to see this? And what decision am I going to make? And so I think that's something that's super easy. And, you can put these on the back of your phone on a screensaver. You can put them on your signature of your email. I mean, companies do this all the time, right? They have their corporate values. And so I think when you just see your values often and frequently, you're more inclined to embody them and be reminded of them, and maybe revisit them and change them. And that's cool too. But at least you're checking in with self, and you put your values lens on, and then just make decisions accordingly.
It keeps it top of mind. It's sort of like, why does someone need motivation every day? I remember hearing someone say this a long time ago. Why does someone need motivation every day? It's like, look, you don't need a bath every day either, but it helps. So, anyway, so how can I'm sure how can my audience follow you? How can they find you? How can they seek you out? Where social media, Instagram? Like, tell us the best way to reach you if someone wants to dig deeper.
Yeah, sure. I mean, all social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Substack. I'd say if you're interested in these concepts and topics, I send out a monthly note, sometimes 2, so on these types of topics. So that if that's of interest, feel free to subscribe. And
where exactly do they subscribe? Where do they find
Substack?
It? No, but Substack. What do they look for? They just type in your name. They type in Invisible Wealth. What are they looking for?
Both. I put them both in the main thingy, so you can search for my name or Invisible Wealth, and I should come up. Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. And same on Instagram and the like. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. I didn't hear the 1:00 church bell, but thank you very much, Jennifer. It's just wonderful for you to share your thoughts with us. Remember to subscribe free to Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness podcast wherever you get your podcasts. All links are in the show notes, and all shows are at Satovsky.com under podcast. Of course, if you want to speak to one of our wealth advisors, go to Satovsky.com and get in touch. Have a great day and find your invisible wealth path. Have a great day.
Satovsky Asset Management, hyper-personalized wealth management that has created joy and abundance since 2007.